At 12:30 on January 15th, 1919, the people on Commercial Street in Boston heard a low rumble. Most of them thought it was the elevated train. It wasn't. It was a wall of molasses, 2 stories tall, coming down the street at 35 miles an hour. Picture that. A wave of black syrup as high as a 2-story building, wide as the street, moving faster than you can run. It hit the firehouse and tore it off its foundation. It picked up a truck and threw it into the harbor. It snapped the steel legs of the elevated railway, the tracks that ran 30 feet above the ground. The wave very nearly reached them. 21 people died that afternoon, and most of them did not die from the impact. They died slowly over the hours that followed, in a way that almost nobody expects molasses to be capable of. This is the story of how a flood of syrup killed 21 people, how a man who couldn't read a blueprint built the thing that did it, and how the trial that followed invented an idea Americans now take completely for granted, that when you build something, you are responsible for whether it holds. To understand the wave, you have to go back 4 years, to a deadline. Molasses in 1915 was not just for baking. Ferment it, and you get industrial alcohol. The feedstock for the explosives a world war was burning through by the trainload. The money was enormous, and United States Industrial Alcohol wanted a giant tank on the Boston waterfront to hold the raw material, close to the ships bringing it up from Cuba and the Caribbean. The man they put in charge was named Arthur Gell. Gell was a company treasurer, a finance man. He had no training in engineering or construction. He had never built anything, and, this came out later, under oath, he could not read a blueprint. He did not hire an engineer to check the design. He did not hire an architect. He consulted no one who could have told him whether the thing would stand. What Gell had was a deadline. A ship was already steaming toward Boston with 700,000 gallons of molasses aboard, and if the tank wasn't ready, that cargo had nowhere to go. So the tank went up in weeks, 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, big enough to hold 2.5 million gallons. Before you trust a tank like that, you're supposed to test it. You fill it with water, and you watch the seams. Water is cheap, it's harmless, and if the tank leaks, you find out without anyone getting hurt. That test would have cost Gell a few days and a little money. He skipped it. He put about 6 inches of water in the bottom, looked at it, and called it done. Then he filled it with molasses. The tank started failing immediately. It leaked from the seams the moment it was full. It leaked so steadily that people from the neighborhood would come and collect the drips. Free molasses straight off the side of the tank. Children scooped it into cans. And every so often the structure made a deep groaning sound. Metal, under a load it didn't want to carry. The company's response to a tank that visibly leaked was not to fix it. It was to paint it brown. Brown molasses, brown tank, and now you couldn't see the seepage running down the sides. One employee was alarmed enough to warn his bosses. He was brushed off. Underneath all of that sat the real problem, the part nobody could see. The steel was about 10% thinner than Gell's own plans had called for, and those plans were already thin by any sensible standard. There were too few rivets holding the plates together, and the steel was low in manganese, which is the kind of dull metallurgical detail that doesn't matter at all, right up until it matters completely. Low manganese made the steel brittle in the cold. So here's the tank, 4 years later. Underbuilt, leaking, brittle, holding 26 million pounds of molasses over a crowded neighborhood. Everything needed for the disaster was already in place. It just needed a warm shipment and a cold day. It got both. 2 days before the flood, the tank was topped off with a fresh load of molasses shipped up warm from the Caribbean. The day of the flood, Boston was unseasonably mild, around 40 degrees after a brutal cold snap that had the city down near zero. Warm molasses in a brittle tank on a thawing afternoon. At 12:30, the tank let go. For decades, people assumed a wave that fast had to be an explosion. Nothing else made sense. Everybody knows molasses is slow. Slow as molasses in January is a saying for a reason. In 2016, a team at Harvard actually ran the numbers. They chilled corn syrup in a walk-in refrigerator, built a little scale model of the North End, and filmed the flow. And what they found is that you don't need an explosion at all. You just need weight. 2.5 million gallons of molasses is heavier than water, about 1.5 times as dense. And when the wall holding it disappears, all that mass comes out as a single surge. Not a pour, a collapse. Gravity alone gets you to 35 miles an hour. No bomb required. But the speed isn't the part that killed people. The cold is. Here's the thing about molasses, that the saying gets half right. Molasses gets thicker as it cools, and it does it fast. The wave that came out of the tank was warm and runny, thin enough to move at terrible speed and spread across whole blocks. Then the January air went to work on it. As the molasses cooled, it thickened, turning from a flood into a setting glue, hardening around everything it had knocked down. People who survived the wave couldn't get out of what it left behind. They were pinned in cooling syrup that got stiffer by the minute, holding them in place, rising around their faces. Rescuers waded in and couldn't move through it either. That is how most of the 21 died. Not crushed, trapped, and then suffocated slowly, while people a few feet away couldn't reach them. And the cruelest part is the reversal. The warmth gave the molasses its speed. The cold gave it its grip. If the same tank had burst on a hot July afternoon, the molasses would have stayed thin. People could have climbed out. Rescuers could have gotten in. And it might have killed almost no one. The season everyone connects with slow, harmless molasses is the exact thing that turned this flood into a mass killing. Then came the reckoning, and it is stranger than the flood. The victims and their families filed around 120 lawsuits. The court bundled them into a single case, one of the first great class actions in Massachusetts history. And United States Industrial Alcohol, the company that built the tank, painted it brown, and ignored the warnings, walked into court with a defense. The tank, they said, did not fail. It was bombed. Anarchists had planted a device inside it and blown it up. Now, in 2026, that sounds absurd. In 1919, it was a calculated bet. This was the height of the first Red Scare. Italian anarchists were genuinely setting off bombs across the country that very year, mailing explosives to senators and judges. And the tank had stood in the North End, a poor, largely Italian immigrant neighborhood. So the company's story wasn't random. It was engineered to point a frightened jury at the victims' own neighbors. They spent more than $50,000 on expert witnesses to sell it. The case ran for 341 days of testimony, around 3,000 witnesses. In the end, the court-appointed auditor, a colonel named Hugh Ogden, threw the bomb story out entirely. The tank failed because it was badly built by people who never checked whether it would hold. The company paid about $600,000, something like $8 million today. But the money is not why this story matters. Before that tank, an American company could build almost anything it wanted with no engineer, no inspection, no signature on a plan. There was nobody whose job it was to say this will hold and put their name to it. After the flood, Massachusetts began requiring that engineers stamp and submit their plans for review, and the idea spread across the country. So the next time you see an engineer's seal on a drawing, that little stamp that says a real person checked this and is accountable for it, know where the habit comes from. It comes from a treasurer who couldn't read a blueprint, a tank painted brown to hide the leaks, and a wave of molasses 2 stories tall on a cold afternoon in Boston that nobody was ever supposed to have to answer for.